Good evening. My name is Bernadette Glover, pastor of St. Paul Baptist Church, Montclair, New Jersey. Thank you for joining us for Reparations and Liberating the Soul of Society, the After Talk. Tonight, we will look at what is the final time, the conclusion, quote unquote, of the matter. But the conclusion is really just a beginning. In Acts chapter 1, Jesus charged his operations team to center themselves to receive power in order to see a mission to the end that was going to cost them potentially everything. He charged them with a strategic focus to look at what was local, to look at what was beyond local, to state, you might say, to what applied to the nation, to what applied to the world, to take the whole thing into consideration. Specifically for us, if we were to do a justice assessment of New Jersey, what would the results look like? What weeds have been growing in the garden state that need to be unearthed? What weeds of injustice have grown tall in the garden state and need to be eradicated? Yeah. And how do we respond to those who have been overexposed, to those who have been overexposed by spoiled goods that came from a garden that perhaps was sown with not the best of intentions? Tonight, Dr. Nicole Drakeford, Dr. Randall Lassiter, Andrea McChristian, and Dr. Evans Spagner, they will lead us further in this conversation. In the words of a great poet, Margaret Walker, the daughter of an AME minister, let a new earth arise. Let another world be born. Let a bloody peace be written in the sky. Let a second generation full of courage issue forth. Let a people loving freedom come to growth. Let a beauty full of healing and a strength of final cleansing be the pulsing in our spirits and our blood. Why not? Isn't it time? Aren't we overdue? Thank you again for listening.
Well, greetings, everyone. It is so good to have you here with us. For our fifth and our final discussion, our panel discussion on reparations in America. Today, we're going to be talking about reparations and the liberation of the soul of the society. This is part 2. I am Reverend Dr. Anita Wright, and I am the pastor of Trinity Presbyterian Church in Montclair, as well as the chaplain here at Bloomfield College in Bloomfield, New Jersey. So I welcome you to our discussion today. It is my pleasure to moderate this conversation, and we're going to have with us as our panelists, the Honorable Wilford Taylor, Dr. Marquita Evans, Dr. Howard Stevenson as well. And so I want to take this time by beginning by just having you guys introduce yourselves to us, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and then we can move on from there. Why don't we begin with you, Dr. Evans, then we'll do Dr. Honorable Judge Taylor, and then we'll do Dr. Stevenson, just because that's how you show up on my screen, okay?
Sure, I'll start. As you mentioned, Dr. Marquita Evans, I'm the president of Bloomfield College. For those of you who don't know, Bloomfield College is actually located in Bloomfield, New Jersey. We are a predominantly Black institution as well as a Hispanic serving institution. There are no HBCUs in New Jersey, and we are a 4-year institution. We've been around for 153 years. 72% of our students are Pell eligible. About 83% of my students are students of color. 52% of my students are first generation. And we have right now about 1,300 students. So excited about being the president here.
Thank you. Judge Taylor, you need to unmute yourself, sir.
There you go. All right. I'm Will Taylor from Hampton, Virginia, and I have been a trial judge here in the state Commonwealth of Virginia since 1985. And I have I also served. I'm most proudly been appointed and elected as a deacon in my church at First Baptist Church by Dr. Glover's sister in Christ, and she's smiling down upon us. She's at home in glory, watching down on us. Reverend Dr. Joan Parrott, who was my mentor here at First Baptist Church, our pastor. And I've served, and so Dr. Glover asked me to come in and talk about the law of Virginia, what happened in Virginia in 2004. That's a major milestone along the way of reparations. If we call it reparations, I call it restitution, I call it restorative justice. And I just want to, and I was asked to participate and give you just a few minutes on what happened in Virginia that gives hope that a reparation, this concept of reparation, happened in Virginia 2004 that gives us that hope. That's what I came by to do, just briefly.
Thank you. Dr. Stevenson? You're also muted. I apologize.
No, my best work is on mute, unfortunately. Thank you so much. My name is Howard Stevenson, and I'm a clinical psychologist and professor at the University of Pennsylvania in the Graduate School of Education. And I'm interested in my research and our social justice work is around how do we navigate racially stressful encounters that we know for children very young and for adults in their later life stages, the stress of those encounters and the threat reactions that they faced over the course of time affects not only our emotional well-being, but our physical health, and even the quality of our sleep. So even young people are disturbed by not navigating the politics of hate in our society. And so we have some ideas about how to address that, in addition to thinking about its relationship to what reparations might mean in this country. So thank you.
Thank you. So let's begin our conversation. I don't know when or others have joined the series, but just a simple definition of reparations is the act of making right past wrongs, generally through monetary compensation, but it can also be through otherwise helping people who have been wronged, right? So that's a simple definition of reparation, a very simple, straightforward definition. Working within the guidelines or within the constraints or the boundaries of this understanding of this definition, what does reparation look like according to you in each of your individual or respective fields? So what is the concept?
Mm-hmm. I'll jump in very quickly too as well, because I talked about my college and I really didn't talk about me. Kind of going back to what Dr. Stevenson was saying earlier, my academic preparation is in counseling as well, in psychology, mainly counselor education and supervision, and also being a past president of the American Counseling Association, but mainly focusing in on multiculturalism, diversity, doing a lot of DEI work now, but specifically in higher education. I specifically chose to come to Bloomfield College because a lot of my students are dealing with food insecurity, housing insecurity. As I mentioned earlier, the median family income for my students here is a little over $30,000. I can't even imagine that. If you know anything of the cost of living here in New Jersey, $30,000 for a family is just unbelievable. So when we talk about reparations and just the word itself, you know, I'm kind of conflicted with it in and of itself. Education. I'm from the South. I was born in late 50s, went through the civil rights movement, in Alabama, and we all know the history of Birmingham and all those things. I was there in the midst of that, being raised by my grandparents. I went into education because education was instilled in me by my grandparents, that education was seen as the key. The key that, she would always would say, baby, once you get your education, no one can take that from you. They can take your house, your car, everything. And so when we talk about, reparations and the impact on that, for me going into education, I've taught, as I say, from the cradle to the grave. And again, getting that instilled in my students right now and helping them attain that education. They look at the graduation rate here at Bloomfield College and it's low because my kids have to work 2 to 3 jobs just to get that education, just to try to finish. Yes, we're a private institution, but we're the lower cost, the best cost private institution in New Jersey. But it's, again, if my students don't get here, get enrolled at Bloomfield, they may never pursue a post-secondary education. So again, thinking about that here and the whole conversation related to reparations, they have to become educated. Education is that key. My students may move from the 5th quintile as far as socioeconomic mobility to the 2nd quintile once they become degreed. And that, again, when we talk about putting or infusing funds into that as a reparation tool, that is so critically important. That causes generational wealth. I had 2 students last week get a job at Oracle with a computer science degree, making 6 figures. I didn't make 6 figures as a PhD faculty member ever, right? And I'm sitting there talking to this baby like, now you got 6 figures, what are you gonna do? The financial literacy piece? Because now you've transformed your whole system, right? Helping them understand that is so critically important. I'm going to stop there. But for me, this is so important for our young people, helping them understand how to navigate this now that they've gotten this education. What do you do now with it, right? What do you do with this money now that you have it to navigate your system and beyond, and to transform it as well?
Well, I in terms of definition of reparations, I would say that what I've followed very closely is the work of William Darity and the co-writer Mullins, who's been writing around From Here to Equality. That's William Darity. He's a wonderful economist out of the South UNC, and part of what Darity and Mullen talk about is when we're going to think about reparations, and some people think about it as sort of restoration, and that's hard to do going back all these centuries. And some think about atonement, and atonement is sort of making sure both parties agree that the wrongs have been admitted to, and in many respects both agree on a good faith effort that atonement has occurred. But restitution is different. Perhaps the judge will talk more about this. And I think part of the things that they are advocating for, which I would agree with, is the sort of eradication of racial disparities in health, income, incarceration, a host of issues that we could think about. But that is almost primary. That is, to what degree can whatever we do, and we have the resources to be actually change racial disparities that have been historic, but also still affect what's going to happen in the future. So whether that's both monetary, but access to resources, it's systemic change. It's more than just money. It has to be around the kinds of changes so that we are going to see very big differences in who actually has and can have access for the future.
Thank you. So you guys, both of you brought up some very interesting points, and it's kind of similar in a way that it's not just about reparation as far as a monetary payout. Let's talk about some of the systemic changes that may need to change or that may need to be addressed in order to bring about restitution or reconciliation, not even reconciliation, but to create this sense of a more equitable system for all who are involved. What does that look like when we talk about the systemic changes that may need to happen?
You know, it has to be all the way across the board, Reverend Wright. You know, we're talking about healthcare. You know, again, I mentioned earlier, my students are dealing with food insecurity, housing insecurity. We're talking about the basic needs of an individual. You know, in my field, the basic of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Before you can get to, you know, self-actualization, do I feel safe? The whole policing thing that we're talking about. And this was kind of, you know, brought the whole reparations conversation back to the forefront dealing with George Floyd. Do we feel safe as a society? The pandemic brought back, again, the whole issues of health disparities. Dealing with, again, Black women as far as pregnancy are concerned, and you know what happens with that. The disparities, again, in healthcare, in how we're perceived in the health fields. Those, again, that with COVID and us dying more as a result of the pandemic, that showed that as well. The housing, what happened, you know, again, we're like 7 miles north of Newark. I had one student lose 9 family members because of the housing conditions that they're living in. This pandemic magnified what was happening, even more so related to that. So again, when we talk about reparations, all of this that's happening just kind of showed how these disparities or inequalities or inequities have been happening all along. So when we talk about reparations, you just can't throw money at it, right? It has to be systemic change all the way across, impacting all of these major systems that we have to look at. And so it has to come from the ground up, the bottom up, top down, all the way around, and we have to be very intentional about it. And it's, again, to me, not just, it's a class issue, and that class usually is Black and brown. Class usually is Black and brown.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Yes, that's absolutely correct. That when we're talking about the systems, it has to cover and go across the board. I think one of the things that Marie Fortune says in her book is nothing sacred. She's speaking in regard to sexual misconduct and abuse within the church, but the principle applies here, even if not the direct correlation. You're gonna have to put one of your devices on mute, Judge Taylor, excuse me. Okay, very good, thank you. Okay. And so one of the things she says, perfect justice includes several things. Perfect justice includes truth telling, it includes acknowledgement, it includes compassion and protection of the vulnerable, accountability, restitution, and vindication. That's perfect justice. Just but the reality is most of us will never see perfect justice. So what we have to do is do the best we can and do and reach what we call, what she calls approximate justice. Approximate justice is including or doing as many of these as you can so that you can make any given situation or any given wrong right. With that kind of concept in mind and talking and considering the systemic changes that need to happen, if it's more than just, you know, throwing money at it, having a payout, right? What then, or what are some tangible ways that we can begin to reach this approximate justice when it comes to this concept of restitution and reparations?
Well, I think I can help you with that one. With what we did in Virginia. All right, now can you hear me? All right, let's see. Is that?
You're probably going to have to turn off one of your screens, one of your devices, sir.
Okay, let me try to do that. Just turn it off, just leave. Okay, I can do that. Just turn it off, just leave. Okay. I just did, all right. So now can you hear me good now?
Yes.
All right, what happened? Let me just tell you what happened in Virginia. Just, we use, I went and looked at the legislation and never did the word reparations appear. But what happened is, probably in a minute or two, let me just kind of give you as with any study of scripture or a passage, you have to have a context. And let me give you the context for how we got to where we are in Virginia. It starts with the 14th Amendment, and we're going to cover
Judge Taylor, that device may have been the wrong one to turn off. We're not able to hear you clearly. It's breaking up. Maybe sign in with the other device and turn this one off, and maybe try that, and we can hear you clearly. Okay.
Let me try that.
Okay. But in the process of time, would either of our other panelists want to take a crack at that, of what it looks like to try to receive some of this approximate justice, if perfect justice is not really reasonable or feasible even?
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem that I mentioned that Darity and Mullen describe is that if you look at the history of this country, one of the challenges is every time we've attempted to make change, systemic change that you just described, is it has been thwarted, whether it's at the Supreme Court level or in local levels, that the preservation of white supremacy has been a constant over the course of these centuries. And so to meet the definition that you described, Dr. Wright, I don't think it's possible without some clarity of what actually has happened. And even now that we are looking at the attempts to rid the invisible critical race theory out of schools, the truth is also now under attack as to the history of these issues that we're asking reparations, or some are asking reparations for. And then I would just add another thing, in having worked with young people and elders who've been both physically and sexually abused, part of the healing has to come from the context of sharing what has happened and knowing what has happened. And we are still, I think, even in our own communities, not aware of what the cost has been that has been taken from us physically, emotionally, and monetarily over these years. We don't necessarily have a sense. And I think when people actually go, wow, I did not know that this is connected to that, and that history is still happening now, and my loans are connected to all of that. My house, my children's future, their children's futures. Once I see that, then I know the scope of the trauma, and then only then can I calculate the cost of that trauma, whether it's monetarily or physically, emotionally, intergenerationally. But if you look at the history of rejection of progress and promotion of white supremacy, it's always going to cost you money, no matter what.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, Judge Taylor, you are back.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Can you see me? Okay. Let me just give you just a brief, just a less than 2 minutes or less review of what happened in Virginia, so that we can track the legal issue here. Again, this is a moral issue, reparations, but as I said, in studying the legislation, there's no word reparation in the legislation, but let me tell you what happened. First of all, again, back to the 14th Amendment, which was enacted in the 1800s. How do we get from the 1800s to 2004? Let me tell you how to do that in a minute or less. And that created what we call the Equal Protection Clause. You hear so much about that. And what that requires, the essence of it is that the government, be it state or federal, must treat all citizens the same. That's equal protection. And then what came along after that clause was enacted was the Plessy case, Plessy v. Ferguson case, where it said the Supreme Court of the United States said that blacks and whites can't be treated differently by government, that we could have separation based on race. And that sparked a civil rights movement that was led by, of course, as you know, Pastor Martin Luther King. It started with the religious and civil rights activists, and then joined by Attorney Thurgood Marshall and the battery of lawyers that have helped prepare the strategy to attack the system of separate but equal through the legal concept. And then along came Brown versus Board of Education that overruled the Plessy decision in 1954. And what it said was separate schools, separation by race violated the 14th Amendment, as we said, the Equal Protection Clause. And so what happened was back in Virginia, right here in Virginia, not too far from Hampton Roads, is a county called Prince Edward County. And what they did is they closed all of their schools because they didn't want to comply with the law of the nation, that was handed down in the Brown decision. So they closed all the schools. And so as a result, what happened was all of the Black kids could not get formal education. The white kids in Prince Edward County went to private schools that were funded by the public tax monies. And so that was a violation of that was a violation of the Constitution. And so what happened was it brought about 2,000 Black kids had no formal education. This was a violation of the law, and it caused tremendous damage, again, as it was brought out and pointed out in the Brown case, to Black children. And so that gave rise to restoration. And we call it, some people call it a restitution in the legal concept. We call it reparations as a civil concept. But in 2004, here's what happened. Let's fast forward to the General Assembly of Virginia. They created the Brown Education Scholarship Program to provide financial support to Virginia residents who were deprived of public education during this period when the Prince Edward County and all of the other school systems in Virginia were shut down and didn't allow Black kids to get formal education. So they created in 2004 the Brown Education Scholarship Program. You see, that's what we're talking about. It's not so much that's money scholarship program. Now the Brown legislation, and this is the key to the whole case, and then I'll stop and maybe try to answer any questions that you might have. But it was passed by the General Assembly of Virginia with 40 votes in the Senate. And that's unanimous, by the way. Can you believe that? It was unanimous vote in the Senate. And it was 94-4 in the House, which is majority. There are 100 members in the House, but it was 94 votes in favor, only 4 against. Mark Warner, who was Senator Warner now from Virginia, who was the governor then, he was a Democrat. But here's the key. Both houses were controlled by Republicans. So all those votes, the majority of votes, came from Republican legislators that passed this, what we call now the Brown Education Scholarship Program. Several hundred descendants or people that were experienced that terrible damage from the discrimination that caused by the separation of not allowing the Black kids to be formally trained in school, received scholarships and financial help to restore them. Restoration, or what do you want to call it? Restoration, you want to call it reparations, restoration, restitution, whatever you want to call it, it's still the same concept. It tried to repair and fix what this violation of the law created. So that's, in 2 minutes or less, the essence of what happened in Virginia. So if you want to call it reparations, it does work. And so the key here is that those thousands of kids that were not allowed to go to school were able to be identified, and they were made to have been given some kind of financial support to get their educations and to restore themselves to a point where they could live and successfully live out the rest of their lives with jobs and educational support. So that happened right here in Virginia, and it's still alive and well. That law is still effective and operating here in Virginia. And it also provided for any kids, even if they were in the communities where white children were not allowed to go to school, they would be eligible to receive this. So it didn't discriminate. It didn't separate between Black or white. It was mainly supported Black kids that were deprived, not only in Prince Edward County, but in any other school division in the state of Virginia, that where the Black kids or any kids that were not allowed to go to school because the school system shut down in defiance to the Brown versus Board of Education case. So, and again, 2 minutes or less, that's the essence of what happened here in Virginia. So it can work. Reparations or restitution or restoration can happen.
Thank you. Thank you. If you want more information about that, if anybody wants more information about that, there's a wonderful, wonderful book by Ken Woodley, and it's called The Road to Healing. Ken Woodley, The Road to Healing, and you can certainly find out more about that. I thank you, because as a native Virginian who has migrated north, I grew up knowing that history. And so one of the things, though, I think we're going to take a pause for a station break, if you will. We're going to introduce Evan Spagner. We're inviting you to come on. You can introduce yourself, and then we'll jump right back into our conversation, because Judge Taylor, your comments really brought up something that have my mind going, and I want to ask a follow-up question. But Evan Spagner, go ahead.
Trying to get the video to work for me and with me.
Okay.
Oh, there we are. Well, we were there. All right. Good afternoon to our distinguished panel and to our host, Pastor Dr. Nita. I have just been in awe. Glad I was not on the screen, because I'm just responding visually and facially to all of your comments so far. Long story short, I'm Evan Spagner. I serve as the Minister of Christian Education at the Fountain Baptist Church here in Summit, New Jersey, where our pastor is Reverend Dr. J. Michael Sanders. I received the invitation to listen in and be a part of this ongoing discussion of reparations by Dr. Glover, and I'm just grateful to her for pulling me out of my comfort zone and being at ease in Zion, as opposed to being concerned about what is happening in my local community and even beyond. So I'm delighted to be with you today, and I look forward to further discussions where I will be asking questions and determining how I can get more involved and hopefully implicate and commit others likewise, because one of the things that I'm confident about, this is too big of a job for any one person to get it accomplished. So we need unity, and not only within the African-American community, but I know the power of having allies even beyond that. So thank you for allowing me to just listen in to your deliberations today. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. So I really want to revisit, Judge Taylor, your conversation and this wonderful work that has happened in Virginia.
Yes.
You mentioned something, and this part I did not know. I just wasn't aware of it, that when this law passed, it was at a time when both houses were controlled by Republicans. And so my question is, and you may or may not be able to answer it, what made it work? What made it work in Virginia? What made it work then? Was there something, what made it work across political lines? And is it something that can be translated to other places? What made this work? Because this is actually a phenomenal feat, especially with those particular conditions.
Well, I'm so glad you asked that question. It had to be that they crossed party lines. It was bipartisan support, because you had some Democrats that were also part of that decision making. But it was controlled by the majority. I think one of the author, who was the gentleman you mentioned, who wrote the book?
Ken Woodley.
And by the way, he's a white man. He's a Caucasian man that was part of that. And what he said was, and I read an article by him. He said that it took a lot of arm bending and discussions across the aisles. And so what happened was, the two sides got together. This was a true bipartisan effort. So I think that's what happened. I tried to figure that out, but that's the only way to explain it, that the Democrats and Republicans got together and decided that this was the best way to restore and fix the problem that was created by Prince Edward County by stopping, and other counties stopping formal education for all people, except through the back door for the white participants. And so I think that's what happened, that they just got together and they dropped their, I guess, their attitudes and bigotry at the time. And they got together and said, this is the right thing to do. And they didn't call it reparations. They called it scholarship help. And I think that might have been the way to get through it, that they didn't call it restitution, or they didn't call it reparations. They just called it scholarship help to those who were suffered and were deprived education as a result of that. So I think that's how it happened. They just got together and they dropped the barriers, and it became a true bipartisan effort.
Excellent.
Can I add something too, which is interesting? Because when we talk about reparations, we talk about it as if this is something that has not occurred for other groups before, right? Because the reality is, there have been other reparations for other groups, but when it comes to Black people, it's as if this has never occurred. When the Japanese were in the internment camps, there was reparations for them. When the Native Americans, what happened to them, even though it wasn't necessarily something that was, positively followed through, there were reparations for them, right? For the Jews, as far as dealing with the Holocaust, there was some reparations for them. But when it comes to Black people, it's as if, and again, historically, if you go back and look at the history, the whole 40 acres and a mule, that was originally an attempt at reparations, even though it was taken back. And there are multiple historical times with different bills that were passed, but again, revoked. For us, it's never ever been followed through. So, we talk about it again as if there's some anomaly, but for whatever reason, for Black people, it can't ever get passed, but for others, it can. And so, I'm just confused a little bit as to why we are the only ones, it seems, that it can work, or it has to be this thing that's just unworkable and has to be debated and talked about over and over again, but for others, it doesn't. So maybe some of the other experts can help me understand that.
Well, Dr. Wright, can I try to address that? Because that's a big concern that I have as well. And I think
you certainly can, because anything that I would say, yeah, go ahead.
Dr. Evans, let me try to help this way. One of the reasons that we were able to get this done in Virginia is because those 1,000 or 2,000 individuals were easily identifiable. They could identify them. Whereas if you go all the way back, I mean, how would you do that? Let's say, for example, when slaves first arrived, how could you identify the individuals that would be recipients of the let's call it reparations? But in this case, you could easily identify the individuals, because from a legal point of view, that's what you'd have to be able to do. How would you identify the recipients? And I guess with internment camps, you could identify as a small number. You could identify them. Again, I don't know how they did it with the Jewish situation, but in America, the law would have to be able to identify the individuals who were injured or harmed as a result of the bad or the government behavior that violated the law. So I don't know how you would do that with millions or multi-millions of people, but you could easily do it in Prince Edward County because you could identify those individuals. And that was, I think, the main difference there. I don't know if that helps explain it.
Yes, with the particulars of Virginia versus other places, but in general, yes. I think you brought up something, Judge Taylor, and even Dr. Stevenson, you brought up something that I think is really worth us exploring. And it's this idea that many times we get in our own way. We get caught up on buzzwords. Buzzwords create this certain level of opposition that if you call it this, then we're not going to do it. And so things like critical race theory, is the newest or latest buzzword. And it's simply a legal term that has been introduced by Kimberly Crenshaw, to say that there's been racialized and racism that has been born out of and perpetuated through the legal system. That's all it means. That's literally all it means. But that's one of the latest buzzwords. Critical race theory, words like reparations or restitutions all continue that when we're talking about it, it tends to be a stopgap. So that, oh no, we're not going to carry on this conversation anymore. How do we get past this idea of being in our own way? And as soon as a buzzword comes up, then the opposite side, the opposing side, just absolutely completely opposes it. Is there a workaround so that we can have the conversation to get the work done, even if you don't call it what we know it is? And let me go a little bit further, and you're also on mute again, Dr. Stevenson. And the follow-up question is in line with what Dr. Evans says is, how can we get us out of our own way when it comes to African Americans in this country? When we talk about doing it for Black people, it tends to just come up against so much opposition as opposed to others.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a great question. I think part of the challenge is that our history in this country puts us in a particular level or maybe status of expendability. If you think about first and last, if you think about the level of violence that's been attributed. Some of you may know my brother whose name is Brian Stevenson. He runs the Equal Justice Initiative down in Montgomery, Alabama. They have the best research on lynching in this country and chronicled over 4,000 lynchings since the late 1800s to mid 20th century. And the challenge of that, they went back and looked at just the lynchings between 1865 and 1876 and found almost 4,000 lynchings that were not previously identified. And this is in the height of progress, right? In the height of change, of reconstruction. And what it brings up is the notion of it's not simply getting in our own way, it's simply intentional that some people will find a problem with progress, no matter how it's called. You know, if you can find a elementary school that teaches critical race theory, I would have put my child in it, but you can't find it. And part of it is we have to name the okie doke. And we also have to connect that okie doke to a historical process and plan and strategy. And Black and brown people need to know, the more we know about these things, the more we're going to be able to move out of our own way about what progress actually means, because we still haven't counted the cost, I would say.
Can I add to that though? You know, and Dr. Wright, you were saying it's the latest buzzword, but critical race theory has been around since the mid-70s. It's not a new word. It's not a new theory. It's not a new concept. I learned this back at the University of Alabama, in Alabama, back in the 70s, right? And so, you know, people like, this is this new thing. It's not a new thing. And so, you know, we've been teaching it and doing it and counseling and in psychology and education. And so, you know, it's just the latest thing that some people have latched onto as if it's a new thing, but it's not. And that's the thing that's driving me crazy, the ignorance and the lack of education of people as far as concepts. And now, especially in Texas, and I hate to even say I'm from Texas, because some people don't know, I just moved from San Antonio, which happens to be a blue city within a red state, because Texas is crazy. But I can say that because I'm from there. My husband is too as well. You know, it's just craziness that's going on. But, you know, the world right now has completely lost its mind in some cases and looking for anything and everything to divide it. And everything has become politicized. And it's almost this madness of separation, of divisiveness, of a depression, of anger, of everything that we look at that just causes this insanity to occur. And so, you know, trying to take it out of the curriculum, the textbooks, the things dealing with women's bodies, it's just all over the map in so many different ways. And I just want to kind of point that out.
If I may try to add something, Dr. Wright, if I may add something.
Hold on one second, Judge Taylor. Dr. Stevenson, you have to get ready to go, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so let me get your comment and then I'll get to you. Okay, Judge Stevenson. Okay. Judge Taylor, excuse me. I apologize.
Sure. I would just add to what Dr. Evans is saying is that even though it's been around for a while, not everybody's known about it. But I think as a tool, the madness that you described has been around for 4 centuries. The violence, the mob sort of craziness. You know, I was listening to Viola Fletcher, who's the 107-year-old survivor of the 1921 race massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And the way that she talks about what has happened to her as an issue of trauma, you know, and I grew up thinking that maybe that was a myth, right? So we didn't have in Southern Delaware access to the knowledge that wasn't just an idea that somebody talked about. It was for real. But part of the madness is keeping from us the information of really what has been our history and how when we have used our voice, the madness comes out of the blue. It doesn't have to make sense, but you could look at that during Brown versus Board. You know, some communities decided we're not going to have school if we're going to have to integrate school. And that's a madness that, you know, is self-destructive, not only for them, but for everybody. So thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Judge Taylor?
Brother Stevenson, please tell your brother that his book inspired me. It's a wonderful book. It's a wonderful read, but it inspired me. But what I was going to say, back to Virginia, tell your brother, Will Taylor from Hampton read it. But back to Virginia, I think one of the things that helped break through that, you know, the barriers that we have was that the evidence was crystal clear. There was no dispute that the separation, not allowing Black kids to get formal education, was destructive and damaged them and us, all of us. And so as a result of that, they came together. They came across party lines and individual lines and came together. Yes, that had to be rectified. Something had to be addressed to deal with that, because that was a big setback for all of the Black kids that couldn't get formal education. And so there was no dispute that it damaged people. And so I think that is the key, that one of the facts were indisputable, that you can't, the separation was harmful, and it was a violation of the law, the Constitution. And so I think that's how they were able to get a crossover and from crossover party lines to get the, it's remarkable to me, and I didn't realize this until I went back and studied this, that you had 40 senators, all 40. Rarely do you have that for anything. You know, if the sun is shining, you're going to get somebody to say, no, it's not shining. But you had 40 senators to vote for that bill, and you had 94 of 100 members of the House of Delegates vote for it. That is remarkable. You don't see those kind of votes in this day and age. But they broke through because the facts were crystal clear. There was no dispute of facts.
Excellent. I'm hearing a couple of things, and we're getting ready to receive your final thoughts. But one of the things that has certainly come out is that there has to be an acknowledgement and agreement that this is what we're dealing with. Harm has been done. There has to be an identification of the harmed or injured parties in certain and in many ways. We've also had and been able to hear that it has to be more than simple money, but it has to be a changing and addressing of systems, not on multiple systems, not even a single one, that cross genres, that cross many things, right? Health disparities, educational disparities, economic disparities, housing disparities, all of these things have to be addressed. And so with that being said, coming down to the point of receiving some of our final thoughts from our panelists, what then will liberate the soul of our American society? Is it reparations? Is it something else? How can we begin to take some first steps to say, this is where we will begin? Let's begin with Dr. Evans, and then we'll receive from Judge Taylor, and we'll go in that way. Thank you.
Ooh, why me? No.
You know, you're right there in front of me.
I know. You know, what I would love to have is a debate or a conversation on whether integration of education was good. And the reason why I want to have that debate is, growing up in the South, we were separated. We were not integrated, and then we were bused and integrated. And then there was very good schools, high expectations, and then we were integrated, and things changed. And all the good Black schools, brand new Black schools, were shut down, and we were bused to the other schools, and something happened in some of the Black communities, and some kids were left behind. But that's a whole nother issue, another conversation for another day. But I was thinking about that as Dr. Stevenson was talking. And that would be like a conversation I would like to have, because I'm kind of torn about it sometimes. And I've taught, as I said, from the cradle to the grave. And I've dealt with this as a counselor. And the reason why I wanted to become a school counselor, because again, I had counselors, and I hate to hear the story of students being tracked one way, and it's usually students of color that are being pushed not in the way that they should be, or not having teachers that look like them, and being told that they cannot be or should not be or whatever. And so, for me, it's always about education. And so we talk about the systems that change. And I said this very early on, that I was always told that education was the key, that whatever can change systems is about education. And that whether it's the health, whether it's the housing, whether it's the economy, all those kinds of things can be impacted once you have your education. Systems is all about that. And so for me, it's empowering others to be able to do that. It just comes back to that. And that's why, my children are educators in some form or another, whether it's dealing with nutrition and wellness, whether it's nursing, engineering, they run the gamut as far as education is concerned. And that's for me the liberator. in so many different ways. That's the denominator that will bring about that change, that will bring about that opportunity for them to be and do whatever they want to do. And so, you know, including health and including wealth. And so I'm going to end with that note as far as my remarks for today on that.
My response, and very briefly, is I echo and agree with everything that Dr. Evans said. And let me tell you this, as a trial judge in Hampton, Virginia, what I've noticed that it is true that if children don't know how to read in third grade level, they're going down different paths. They're not going to make it out of high school. And when they don't make it out of high school, they resort to the street.
Right.
And that's what happens. That's what we have most of the problems and the crime in our communities, especially the Black community, results from kids that have not graduated from high school. They don't have the skills to move forward and pursue their careers whatever they may choose in life. And so the key is education. It has to start right there in school. If we can head it off in kindergarten now. I used to say first grade, but let's go to kindergarten. Get kids to be able to get along and respect other kids in the classroom, listen to their teachers, and learn what they need to do, how to succeed in life, and also how to read beyond third grade. If we can do those things, and just to echo again what Dr. Evans just said, it's all about education and what happens in the schoolhouse. If we can do those things well, we can do a lot of things to turning the trends that we have around. We could eliminate many of the problems that we have in our society now by properly educating our young people.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Thank you to our panelists, to Judge Wilford Taylor, to Dr. Marquita Evans, and to Dr. Stevenson, who had to leave to go to class. We say thank you. I appreciate you so much taking the time to share with us reparations and the liberation of the soul of our society. I will leave you with this final thought. There's a quote by Maya Angelou that simply says this: "No person can know where she is going unless she knows exactly where she has been and exactly how she arrived at her present place." In order for us to move forward, in order for us to be liberated, we must remember from whence we have come, how we got to where we're going, to create a plan for how to make and create a different future. Thank you for joining us for our series today and our entire series on reparations. I pray that you have a great day and a great evening or morning or whenever you happen to be watching this. And again, thank you to our panelists. To St. Paul and Dr. Glover, we are very appreciative.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.